A blood-soaked letter, found in the pocket of a fallen friend, sets Nokoni, a Comanche scout hardened by loss, on a path he never chose. In the unforgiving frontier of 1875, where trust is scarcer than water, he rides to Willow Creek to honor a promise not his own. What awaits is a woman with storm-gray eyes, 2 children clinging to hope, and a truth that could shatter them all. Will Nokoni find redemption, or merely more ghosts under the vast Wyoming sky? Subscribe now to uncover the heart of this tale. Share where you're listening from, and stay tuned. Secrets buried in ash and blood await. Can you guess what the letter holds? Dust clung to the air, thick with the acrid bite of gunpowder and the faint tang of pine. The gunfire had faded, leaving only the eerie quiet of death on the Wyoming frontier, 1875. Nokoni, a Comanche scout carved lean by years of survival, slid from his horse, boots crunching against the rocky earth. His dark eyes scanned the carnage, sprawled bodies, spent shells, a horse twitching in its final throes. But his gaze locked on one figure, Elias, his only white friend, the man who'd shared firelight and silence when words failed. Elias lay face down, blood pooling beneath him, staining the dirt black. Nokoni knelt, his calloused hands trembling as he turned the body over. A bullet had torn through Elias's chest, leaving a ragged hole where life once pulsed. His blue eyes, wide and glassy, stared past the endless sky. Nokoni's breath caught, not from the sight. He'd seen death before, in raids, in wars, in the slow bleed of his people's spirit, but from the weight of losing the one man who'd called him brother, not savage. He pressed a hand to Elias's face, closing those unseeing eyes, and muttered a Comanche prayer, low and guttural, the words half lost to the wind. His fingers brushed Elias's coat, searching for the flint he always carried. Instead, they found something softer, a folded paper, worn thin at the edges, stained with blood. Nokoni hesitated, the wind tugging at his braid. He unfolded it with care, as if it might crumble like the lives around him. The script was neat, deliberate, penned by a hand that knew patience. Elias, if you still remember your promise, I'll wait at Willow Creek. I don't need gold, only you to come back. I can't stand alone against the wind forever. Clara. The words hit like a blade. Elias, the man who spoke of trails and whiskey, never of a woman, never of a home. Another page, older, tucked beneath. Elias, the children ask for their father. It's been a year. I won't beg, but we need you. Clara Nokoni's jaw tightened. Children? Elias had never breathed a word of them, not in the long nights tracking outlaws or dodging cavalry patrols. The letters felt heavier than the rifle slung across his back. He folded them carefully, slipping them into his own coat, next to the heart that still beat, unlike his friends. The ambushers were gone, their tracks swallowed by the hills, but Nokoni's eyes burned with a quiet vow. He'd find them later. First, there was a promise to keep, one Elias had left behind. He stood, dusting his hands on his worn buckskin pants, and scanned the horizon. Willow Creek lay 3 days' ride west, a speck of a town where men drowned their sins in cheap liquor. Nokoni didn't know Clara, didn't know if she'd curse him for bringing death's news, but the weight of the letters demanded he move. He dragged Elias's body to a shallow gully, piling stones to keep the coyotes at bay. It wasn't a proper grave, not yet, but it would hold until he returned. He took Elias's hat, weathered and blood-flecked, and tied it to his saddlebag. A reminder, a debt. Mounting his horse, a wiry Mustang that knew his temper, Nokoni rode west. The sun sank low, painting the plains in hues of fire and shadow. His mind churned with memories of his own losses, his sister's voice fading in the reservation's dust, his father's spear broken under cavalry boots. Elias had been different, a man who saw Nokoni's scars and didn't flinch. Now that man was gone, and Nokoni carried his last words, scrawled by a stranger's hand. What kind of woman waited for a drifter like Elias? What kind of children still hoped for a father who'd never come? The wind howled, carrying the scent of sagebrush and distant rain. Nokoni's hand rested on the letters, their edges sharp against his skin. He didn't know if Clara would welcome him or drive him off with a shotgun, but he'd face her storm. The frontier didn't forgive broken promises, and neither did he. As the stars began to prick the sky, Nokoni rode on, a lone figure against the vast, unyielding land, chasing a debt that might cost him everything. The stars burned cold above the Wyoming plains, their light too faint to guide a man through the weight of his choices. Nokoni rode on, the blood-flecked hat tied to his saddlebag swaying with each step of his Mustang, the letters in his coat pressed against his chest, their words a tether pulling him toward Willow Creek, a place he'd never seen, yet one that held a stranger's hope and a dead man's debt. 3 days he rode, through sagebrush and shallow ravines, the wind biting at his knuckles. The frontier of 1875 was a land of raw edges, where the earth itself seemed to grudge a man's passage. His horse snorted, hooves kicking up dust that glowed faintly under the dawn's first blush. Nokoni's eyes, sharp as a hawk's, traced the horizon for threats. Bandits, wolves, or worse, the ghosts of his own past. The reservation's shadow lingered in his mind, the hollow cries of his people, the crack of soldiers' whips. He shook the thought loose, focusing on the trail. Willow Creek was close now, its name whispered in trading posts, as a speck of a town where dreams went to drown. By noon on the third day, the outline of shacks appeared, huddled against a bend in the river. Willow Creek was no more than a cluster of weathered boards and crooked chimneys, the air thick with the sour reek of whiskey and horse sweat. Men lounged outside a saloon, their eyes narrowing as Nokoni rode past, his braid and buckskin marking him as other. He ignored their stares, his face a mask of stone. At the general store, a man unloading grain sacks glanced up, wiping sweat from his brow. "You looking for someone?" he asked, voice rough as gravel. "Clara," Nokoni said, his tone low, the single word carrying the weight of his journey. The man squinted, then nodded toward the edge of town. "Clara Wade. She's got a place past the cottonwoods. Run-down spread, whitewashed barn falling apart. 2 kids always raising hell. Can't miss it." Nokoni tipped his head, a gesture more habit than thanks, and urged his horse onward. The cottonwoods loomed, their leaves rustling like whispers of warning. The ranch came into view, a sagging fence, a roof patched with mismatched shingles, and a barn that leaned like a drunk against the wind. It was a place fighting to stand, much like the man who rode toward it. On the porch, a woman stood, her silhouette sharp against the noon sun. She wore a faded pink dress, its hem frayed, and Elias's cowboy hat, weathered but proud. A revolver rested against the wall beside her, within easy reach. Nokoni dismounted, his boots stirring dust as he approached. The woman's eyes, gray as a storm cloud, locked onto him, unyielding. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steady but edged with suspicion. "Nokoni," he said, pausing at the foot of the porch. "I rode with Elias." He reached into his coat, pulling out the blood-stained letters. "He's gone. 3 days back." These were his. Clara's face tightened, her lips a thin line. She stepped forward, hand outstretched, and took the letters, her fingers brushing the worn paper as if it might burn. She didn't read them, not yet, just clutched them to her chest. Behind her, the door creaked, and 2 children appeared, a boy maybe 12, with eyes hard as flint. Zeke, Nokoni guessed. Beside him, a younger girl, May, her face smudged with dirt, hope flickering in her gaze. "Is it Pa?" she whispered, voice trembling. Clara's jaw clenched and she shook her head. "No, May. This is his friend." Her voice broke on the word, but she held herself tall, the hat casting a shadow across her face. Zeke stepped forward, his fists balled. "You ain't my Pa. Why are you here?" Nokoni met the boy's stare, seeing Elias in the sharp angle of his cheekbones. "Because he couldn't be," he said, his voice low but firm. "And someone's got to carry his word." Clara's eyes flickered, a mix of grief and wariness. She turned to the children. "Inside, both of you." They hesitated, Zeke's glare lingering, but obeyed. Alone now, Clara faced Nokoni, the letter still in her grip. "You bringin' me his death don't make you welcome," she said, her words cutting like a north wind. "What do you want?" Nokoni's hand rested on his knife, not a threat but a reflex. "Nothing you don't offer. I came to give you those. What you do now is yours to choose." She studied him, her gaze piercing through the dust and distrust. The wind stirred, rattling the loose shingles above. "Stay the night," she said finally, almost a challenge. "Barn's got room, but don't think you're staying longer." Nokoni nodded, his face unreadable. He led his horse toward the barn, the letter's weight now hers to bear. As he passed the sagging fence, he felt the town's eyes on him, the whispers of prejudice already coiling. Willow Creek was no sanctuary, and Clara's ranch was no home. Not yet. But the trail had led him here, and Nokoni knew the frontier demanded more than promises. It demanded blood, sweat, and time. He'd give what he could, for Elias, for the woman who waited, and for the children who still dreamed of a father. The barn's shadows offered Nokoni no comfort, only the musty scent of hay and the creak of warped boards under a restless wind. He lay on a pallet of sacks, Elias's hat beside him, its brim catching the faint moonlight through a cracked slat. Clara's words, sharp as a barbed fence, echoed in his mind. "Stay the night, but don't think you're staying longer." Willow Creek's distrust clung to him like dust, but the weight of Elias's letters held him fast. Dawn broke over the Wyoming frontier, 1875, painting the sky in streaks of iron and gold, and Nokoni rose, his purpose as unyielding as the land itself. He stepped into the yard, the morning air sharp with frost. The ranch sprawled before him, a patchwork of neglect. Fence posts leaning like weary sentinels, a corral gate dangling by a single hinge, and a water trough crusted with ice. Clara was already at work, hauling a bucket from the well, her pink dress tucked against the chill. She glanced at him, her storm-gray eyes unreadable, then turned back to her task. Nokoni didn't wait for an invitation. He grabbed a hammer from the barn and set to the fence, driving nails with steady, practiced blows. The rhythm grounded him, drowning out the whispers of prejudice he'd felt in town. Zeke watched from the porch, his scowl as sharp as a blade. The boy's hands fidgeted, itching for something to prove. Nokoni nodded toward the corral. "You know how to hold a rein?" he asked, voice low but carrying across the yard. Zeke's chin lifted, defiant. "Better'n you, I reckon." "Show me." Nokoni tossed him a coiled rope, its weight slapping the dirt. Zeke hesitated, then stalked to the corral, where a skittish mare snorted at his approach. Nokoni followed, leaning against a post, his dark eyes tracking the boy's every move. Zeke fumbled at first, the rope tangling, but Nokoni's quiet pointers, looser grip, let it breathe, steadied him. By midday, Zeke had the mare turning under his hand, a flicker of pride breaking through his guarded stare. Clara observed from a distance, her hands rough with work, the cowboy hat shielding her thoughts. At noon, she called the children for lunch, her voice cutting through the clatter of Nokoni's hammer. May bounded out, her pigtails bouncing, clutching a rag doll. "You staying for supper, mister?" she asked, her voice bright but fragile, like glass on a saloon counter. Nokoni paused, hammer mid-swing. "If your ma allows it." Clara's lips tightened, but she said nothing, only gestured to a table set with cornbread and beans. The meal was silent, save for May's chatter about barn cats. Zeke ate fast, his eyes darting between Nokoni and the door, as if expecting trouble to ride in. Clara's silence was heavier, her fingers tracing the edge of the letters she'd tucked away. Nokoni felt the weight of their stares, the unspoken question. Why stay? He had no answer they'd trust, not yet. After lunch, he turned to the roof, climbing to patch the holes with cedar shingles he'd found stacked in the barn. The work was grueling, the sun unrelenting despite the autumn chill. Below, Willow Creek's whispers reached the ranch, townsfolk muttering about the Comanche lingering where he didn't belong. A passing rider, his spurs glinting, slowed to stare, spitting into the dirt before moving on. Nokoni ignored him, but Clara's hand drifted to her revolver, propped against the porch rail. As dusk settled, painting the plains in shades of bruise and amber, Nokoni's past crept into his thoughts. He remembered the reservation, the hunger that gnawed like a wolf, the children torn from their mother's arms. He saw his sister's face, faded now, her voice silenced by fever. Elias had been the only one to see him as more than a scout, more than a tool for the cavalry. Now, fixing Clara's roof, teaching Zeke to rein a horse, Nokoni felt a flicker of purpose, fragile but stubborn, like a spark in dry grass. That evening, Clara set a plate for him without a word. Zeke lingered at the table, his earlier defiance softened, though his eyes still probed for weakness. "You ain't like Pa," he said, voice flat. "He never fixed nothin'." Nokoni met his gaze, steady as stone. "I ain't him. But I'm here." Clara's eyes flickered, a storm stirring behind them. She stood abruptly, clearing the plates, her movements sharp. "Barn's still yours," she said, her voice a warning. "Don't get comfortable." Nokoni nodded, stepping into the night. The stars were brighter now, but no less cold. He felt the ranch's fragility, the town's hostility, and the ghosts of his own losses pressing close. Yet something held him. Elias's debt, Clara's defiance, the children's need. The frontier was a hard land, but Nokoni had survived harder. As he settled into the barn's shadows, the hammer's weight still warm in his hand, he knew this was no home. But it was a start, and he'd carve his place in it, nail by nail. The night's chill lingered in Nokoni's bones as he stepped from the barn, the hammer's weight still a faint ache in his palm. Clara's warning, "Don't get comfortable," hung heavy, but the ranch's quiet pulse, the creak of its sagging beams, called him to stay. Dawn broke over Willow Creek, 1875, the sky a bruised purple, and with it came the hoofbeats of trouble, stirring dust on the road to Clara's land. By mid-morning, the sound grew clearer. 5 riders, their silhouettes dark against the rising sun. Nokoni paused, axe poised over a split log, his eyes narrowing. The lead rider, a man with a scarred face and a cavalry coat faded to gray, reined up at the gate. Clara stepped onto the porch, her revolver now tucked in a holster at her hip, Elias's hat casting a shadow over her steady gaze. Zeke and May peered from the doorway, their faces tight with fear. "Clara Wade," the scarred man called, his voice like gravel under a boot. "Name's Hollis. Used to ride with your man, Elias. This land's got water we need. You got 3 days to pack up and get, or we take it." Clara's hand rested on her gun, unflinching. "This is my home. You'll take nothing? Hollis smirked, leaning forward in his saddle. Elias didn't tell you, did he? He wasn't no saint. Ran with us on jobs, stole cattle, raided claims. Got himself killed 'cause he crossed the wrong man. That's the truth of your hero. The word struck like a whip. Clara's face paled, but she held her ground. Nokoni stepped forward, axe still in hand, his voice low but cutting. Elias is dead. His debts ain't yours. Ride on! Hollis's eyes flicked to Nokoni, a sneer curling his lip. Comanche, huh? Elias always did keep strange company. 3 days, Clara. Then we burn this place down. The riders wheeled their horses, dust clouding their retreat. Clara stood frozen, her fingers white-knuckled around the porch rail. Zeke stormed out, his voice sharp. Is it true, Ma? Was Pa a thief? May's eyes welled up, her rag doll clutched tight. Clara's silence was answer enough, and the boy turned his glare on Nokoni. You knew him. Did you know? Nokoni met Zeke's eyes, steady as stone. I knew the man who shared my fire, not the one they're talking about. But doubt gnawed at him. Elias had kept secrets, and those secrets now threatened this fragile ranch. Clara turned away, her voice brittle. Get to work. We ain't leaving. She disappeared inside, leaving Nokoni with the children's stares and the echo of Hollis's threat. He spent the day reinforcing the fence, his axe bites sharp and deliberate, but his mind churned. Elias's letters had spoken of promises, not betrayal. Had Nokoni ridden all this way for a lie? As dusk painted the plains in shades of ash, Zeke followed Nokoni to the corral, his fists balled. Why are you still here if Pa was no good? He demanded. Nokoni paused, wiping sweat from his brow. 'Cause you and your ma ain't him, and this land's worth fighting for. He handed Zeke a hammer, a silent challenge. The boy took it, his scowl softening as he drove a nail into a post. That night, by the flicker of a lantern, Clara sat at the table, the letters spread before her. Her fingers traced Elias's name, her face a map of grief and anger. He wrote of coming back, she said, voice low. Never said he was running with thieves. Nokoni leaned against the doorframe, the barn's shadows behind him. Men hide their worst from those they love. Don't mean he didn't mean to return. Her eyes met his, searching. And you? What are you hiding? He thought of the reservation, the screams of his people, the sister he couldn't save. Enough, he said, voice rough. But I'm here now. That's what counts. Clara nodded, a flicker of trust breaking through her guard. 3 days, she said. We'll need more than hammers. She glanced at the revolver, then back at him. You ever shot to kill? More than I care to count, Nokoni replied, his gaze steady. As he stepped into the night, the weight of the coming fight settled on him. If you're gripped by this tale of loyalty and secrets, hit that subscribe button to follow Nokoni's stand. It's a story carved in dust and blood, and I'd love to know where you're listening from. The stars above Willow Creek offered no answers, only a cold reminder of time running out. Nokoni checked his rifle, its barrel cool against his palm, and scanned the dark horizon. Hollis's threat was no bluff, and Elias's past had brought a storm to Clara's door. 3 days would decide if this ranch would stand or burn, and whether Nokoni could keep a promise that wasn't his. The horizon swallowed Hollis's threat, but its shadow lingered over Clara's ranch like a storm waiting to break. Nokoni stood under the stars, rifle in hand, the cold metal grounding him against the weight of Elias's secrets. 3 days, Hollis had said. 3 days to leave or face fire. Nokoni's jaw tightened as he scanned the dark plains, knowing time was a noose tightening around them all. Dawn crept over Willow Creek, 1875, the light thin and brittle, and with it came the first cracks in the fragile trust he'd built. Zeke was different that morning, his eyes darting like a spooked colt's. The boy worked alongside Nokoni, hauling timber to shore up the barn, but his hands shook, and his silence was sharp, not sullen. Clara noticed too, her gaze lingering as she mended a torn fence with May trailing behind, humming to her rag doll. Nokoni drove a nail into a post, the hammer's rhythm steady, but his mind churned. Hollis's words about Elias, thief, traitor, had cut deep, and Zeke's anger was a fuse already lit. By noon, the boy's restlessness broke. He dropped a plank, dust swirling, and faced Nokoni. "You knew Pa was a liar," he spat, voice low but venomous. "You rode with him. Why didn't you tell us?" Nokoni set the hammer down, meeting Zeke's glare. "I told you what I knew. Elias was my friend, not a saint. His mistakes don't change what's here." Zeke's fists clenched. "You're no better. Acting like you care. But you'll leave, just like him." He stormed off toward the corral, kicking dirt with each step. Clara watched from the fence, her face unreadable, but her hand rested on the revolver at her hip. Nokoni returned to work, splitting logs under a sun that burned despite the autumn chill. But unease gnawed at him. Zeke's words weren't just anger. They were a wound, raw and bleeding. He remembered his own youth, the betrayal of promises broken by men in blue coats, the hunger that followed. Zeke was no different, carrying a boy's hope crushed by a father's absence. That afternoon, trouble found them. A rider approached, not Hollis, but one of his men, lean and sharp-eyed, with a rifle slung across his back. He reined up at the gate, his gaze locking on Zeke, who stood alone by the water trough. Nokoni, stacking wood near the barn, caught the glint of intent in the man's eyes. He dropped the logs, moving quietly toward the corral, his knife sheathed, but ready. The rider leaned down, voice low. "Boy, you want this place safe? Tell us where that Comanche keeps his horse. He's trouble, and you know it." Zeke froze, his face a mix of fear and fury. The rider pressed, tossing a coin that glinted in the dust. "Hollis'll make it worth your while." Nokoni's blood ran cold. He stepped into view, his shadow falling across the trough. "Zeke," he said, voice calm but firm. "Walk away." Zeke's eyes darted between them, the coin at his feet a temptation. For a moment, his hand twitched, as if to take it. Then he kicked it into the dirt, his voice shaking. "I ain't a traitor." The rider sneered, spurring his horse and vanishing down the trail. Clara emerged, her revolver drawn, having seen it all from the porch. Zeke inside. Now. Her tone was iron, but her eyes held a mother's fear. The boy obeyed, head low, leaving Nokoni and Clara in the yard's heavy silence. "You saw what he almost did," Clara said, her voice low, the hat casting a shadow over her grief. "He's scared, Nokoni. Scared of losing more than he already has." Nokoni nodded, his gaze on the horizon where the rider had fled. "He's a boy carrying a man's hurt." But he didn't take the coin. Clara's lips tightened. "Not today. What about tomorrow?" That evening, Nokoni found Zeke in the barn, sharpening a stick with a pocket knife, his movements jerky. The boy didn't look up. "I didn't mean to," he muttered. Pa left us, and now Hollis says he was no good. What if you're the same?" Nokoni crouched, his voice steady as stone. "Your pa couldn't come back. I can. And I won't walk away, Zeke. Not unless you and your ma send me." He held the boy's gaze, seeing the war between trust and doubt. "You didn't betray us today. That's a start." Zeke's knife stilled, his eyes glistening but hard. He nodded once, sharp, and turned away. Nokoni stood, the barn's shadows deeper now, the air thick with the scent of hay and coming rain. Hollis's deadline loomed, and Zeke's near betrayal was a warning. Trust was fragile, and the ranch's survival hung on it. As he stepped into the yard, the wind carried the distant howl of a coyote, a reminder of the fight ahead. 2 days remained, and Nokoni knew blood would mark their end. The coyote's howl faded into the Wyoming night, but its echo lingered, a warning of the blood to come. Nokoni stood in Clara's yard, the air thick with the scent of rain and the weight of 2 days gone. Hollis's deadline was a blade at their throats, and Zeke's near betrayal had left a scar on the ranch's fragile trust. Night fell on Willow Creek, 1875, the stars hidden by clouds heavy with storm, and Nokoni checked his rifle, its barrel a cold promise against the fire to come. The final day dawned gray, the plains shrouded in mist. Nokoni worked with grim focus, barricading windows with planks and sharpening stakes to line the corral. Clara moved beside him, her pink dress tucked tight, Elias's hat pulled low. She loaded her revolver with steady hands, her storm-gray eyes fixed on the horizon. Zeke hauled water to douse any flames, his jaw set, while May clutched her doll, whispering prayers she'd learned from her mother. The ranch was a fortress of desperation, its sagging beams no match for Hollis's gang, but Nokoni and Clara stood as its last line. As dusk bled into night, the air grew heavy, the silence broken by distant hoofbeats. Nokoni's pulse quickened, his senses honed from years tracking through hostile lands. "They're coming," he said, voice low, motioning Clara to the porch. She nodded, her revolver glinting in the lantern's glow. Zeke grabbed a pitchfork, his eyes hard with a boy's resolve, while May was sent to hide in the root cellar, her doll left behind in the dirt. The riders emerged from the dark, 6 shadows against the plains, torches flickering like demons' eyes. Hollis led them, his scarred face twisted in a sneer, a torch in one hand, a pistol in the other. "Time's up, Clara," he shouted, his voice cutting through the wind. "Give us the water, or this place burns." Clara stepped forward, hat casting a shadow like a crown. "You'll get nothing but lead," she spat, her revolver raised. Nokoni stood beside her, rifle steady, his dark eyes locked on Hollis. The gang fanned out, their torches painting the night in orange and black. A shot cracked, splintering the porch rail. Nokoni fired back, his bullet catching a rider in the shoulder, sending him sprawling. Chaos erupted. Gunfire roared, and a torch arced through the air, igniting the barn's dry timbers. Flames licked upward, smoke choking the night. Clara's shots were precise, dropping another man, but Hollis charged, his pistol blazing. Nokoni tackled Clara behind a water trough as bullets chewed the dirt around them. Zeke lunged from the shadows, swinging his pitchfork at a rider who screamed and fell, clutching his leg. Nokoni grabbed the boy, shoving him toward the house. "Stay low," he growled, then turned, firing at a man creeping toward the corral. The air was thick with smoke, the barn a roaring inferno, its heat searing Nokoni's skin. He felt a sharp pain in his chest, a bullet grazing deep, blood soaking his shirt. But he pushed through, his vision narrowing to Hollis's scarred face. Hollis laughed, a guttural sound, and aimed at Clara, who was reloading behind the trough. "Your man betrayed us, and now you'll pay," he roared. Nokoni surged forward, knife drawn, and tackled Hollis into the dirt. The men grappled, dust and blood mixing as Nokoni's blade found Hollis's arm, forcing the pistol to drop. Hollis swung a torch, its flames grazing Nokoni's shoulder, but Nokoni drove his knife into Hollis's chest, ending the fight with a wet gasp. The remaining riders fled, their horses' hooves fading into the night. The barn burned, its beams collapsing in a shower of sparks. Clara ran to Nokoni, her hands pressing his wound, blood seeping through her fingers. "Don't you die on me," she whispered, her voice breaking for the first time. Elias's hat falling to the dirt. Her eyes, wet with tears, held a fear deeper than the fight. Nokoni grunted, pain lancing through him. "Ain't planning to," he rasped, his hand gripping hers. Zeke stood nearby, pitchfork still in hand, his face pale but steady. The ranch was scarred, the barn a smoldering ruin, but it stood. Clara helped Nokoni to the porch, her touch firm despite her trembling. The night was quiet now, save for the crackle of dying flames and the distant wail of wind. May emerged from the cellar, running to Clara, who held her tight. Nokoni leaned against the rail, blood staining his shirt, the fight's weight settling on him. Hollis was dead, his secrets buried with him. But the ranch's survival came at a cost. Clara's tears, Zeke's resolve, and the burning barn were marks of a battle won, but the war for this land, and their trust, was far from over. As dawn's first light touched the smoking ruins, Nokoni knew the hardest fight lay ahead, proving he'd stay, not just for Elias, but for them. Dawn's light crept over the smoldering ruins of Clara's barn, painting the ranch in shades of ash and frost. Nokoni leaned against the porch rail, his chest wound a dull fire under blood-crusted bandages, the fight with Hollis still etched in the air like gun smoke. Clara's touch, firm yet trembling, had kept him alive, but the cost of survival hung heavy. Trust was won, but the land was scarred, and winter loomed like a wolf on the Wyoming plains. Snow fell by noon, soft at first, then relentless, blanketing Willow Creek, 1875, in a cold that bit deeper than any bullet. Nokoni ignored the pain, hauling charred timbers from the barn's wreckage to salvage what could be used. His breath fogged in the air, each step a fight against the wound that seeped beneath his shirt. Clara worked beside him, her pink dress swapped for a heavy coat, Elias's hat still shielding her storm-gray eyes. She chopped firewood with fierce precision, her axe bites echoing across the yard. Zeke followed, stacking logs with a quiet focus, his pitchfork heroics from the night before, unspoken, but heavy. May stayed close, bundling kindling, her small hands red from the cold. The ranch was a ghost of itself, the barn reduced to blackened bones, the corral half buried in snow. Food was scarce, cornmeal and dried beef rationed in a pantry that mocked their hunger. Nokoni hunted when he could, tracking rabbits through the drifts, but the plains offered little. His Comanche instincts, honed by years of scarcity, kept him sharp, but the memories of reservation winters, children shivering, bellies hollow, clawed at him. He wouldn't let this family starve, not while he could stand. Clara's distance lingered, her trust as fragile as the ice on the water trough. She spoke little, her words clipped, her eyes wary when they met his. One evening, as the wind howled through the patched roof, she caught him wincing while splitting logs. "You're bleeding again," she said, voice flat but edged with concern. She motioned him inside, where a fire crackled in the hearth. Her hands, rough from work, unwrapped his bandage, cleaning the wound with whiskey that burned worse than the cold. "You should have left," she muttered, not meeting his gaze. "This ain't your fight." Nokoni's voice was steady, though pain tightened his jaw. "It is now. You and those kids ain't facing this alone." Her hands paused, the firelight catching a flicker of doubt in her eyes. She tied the bandage tight and stepped back, arms crossed. "I don't need saving." "Didn't say you did," Nokoni replied, his gaze holding hers. "But a fence needs two posts to stand." She turned away, but the silence felt different, softer, like snow settling. Zeke watched from the table, his pocket knife carving a stick into a crude horse, his eyes less hostile. May slept by the fire, her doll tucked under her arm. the warmth a small defiance against the storm outside. Days blurred into weeks, the snow piling high, sealing the ranch from Willow Creek's whispers. Nokoni rebuilt what he could, hammering new planks into the corral, his wound slowing but not stopping him. Zeke began to follow closer, asking how to track game in snow, his questions sharp but curious. One morning, as they checked traps, the boy pointed to a set of prints, coyote fresh. "You teach me to hunt like that?" he asked, voice low. Nokoni nodded, showing him how to read the snow story. "Patience and eyes," he said. "The land tells you what it wants." Zeke listened, his breath fogging, a spark of respect replacing his old anger. Clara saw it too, her gaze lingering from the porch. One night, as the blizzard raged, she set a tin cup of coffee before Nokoni, the steam curling like a ghost. "You're still here," she said, her voice softer, almost a question. She reached into her coat, pulling out Elias's hat, its brim worn but whole. "This was his. Ain't right I keep it when you're the one stayin'." Nokoni took it, his fingers brushing hers, the hat heavy with meaning. "I'll wear it for now," he said, placing it on the table, not his head. "But it's yours, till you're ready to let it go." The winter pressed harder, the cold a living thing that clawed at the walls. They shared what little they had. Bread baked from dwindling flour, broth stretched thin. Clara's hands grew rougher, her face gaunt, but her eyes held a fire that matched Nokoni's own. The ranch stood, battered but unbroken, a testament to their stubborn will. As the snow deepened, Nokoni felt the weight of their survival, not just in body, but in the bonds they'd forged. Fragile, yet growing, like roots beneath the frozen earth. The snow's grip on Willow Creek loosened, its weight melting into rivulets that carved paths through the ranch's scarred earth. Nokoni stood amid the wreckage, Elias's hat now on his head, a quiet testament to Clara's trust. The winter of 1875 had forged bonds from hunger and cold, but spring's promise stirred a new fight, to rebuild not just the land, but a home. Dawn broke over the Wyoming plains, 1876, the sky clear as glass, and with it came the green of new life, pushing through the ashes of the past. Nokoni worked from first light, his wound now a faint scar beneath his shirt. He cleared the last of the barn's charred remains, stacking salvageable planks for a new shelter. His hands, calloused from months of labor, moved with purpose, driven by the rhythm of survival. Clara tilled the kitchen garden, her coat shed for the faded pink dress, its hem dusted with soil. Her storm-gray eyes, once wary, now held a warmth that matched the sun. Zeke hammered nails into a new fence, his movements surer, while May scattered seeds, her laughter ringing like a bell across the yard. The ranch stirred awake, its fields sprouting corn and beans, the corral sturdy once more. Nokoni taught Zeke to mend a saddle, showing him how to stitch leather with a bone needle, his voice low and patient. "Tight, but not forced," he said, guiding the boy's hands. Zeke nodded, his earlier anger replaced by a quiet focus, his eyes reflecting Elias's, but carrying a new strength. May followed them, her rag doll tucked in her apron, asking Nokoni about the Comanche stars she'd seen him watch at night. He pointed to the sky, naming them in his tongue, their stories weaving a bridge between his past and her future. Clara watched from the porch, her hands still rough, but her face softer, the lines of grief eased by time. One afternoon, as Nokoni repaired a plow, she approached, a tin cup of water in hand. "You've done more than Elias ever promised," she said, her voice steady but carrying a weight. "This place, it's alive again." Nokoni wiped sweat from his brow, meeting her gaze. "It's your fight that kept it standin'. I just held the hammer." She shook her head, a faint smile breaking through. You held more than that. Her hand lingered on his arm, a touch that spoke louder than words. The town's whispers had faded, Willow Creek's prejudice dulled by Nokoni's quiet defiance. He rode to the general store for supplies, trading pelts for flour and nails. The storekeeper, once cold, now nodded with grudging respect. But Nokoni's thoughts weren't on the town. They were on the ranch, where Clara's garden bloomed and Zeke's hammer echoed. The land was healing, but so were they, each day knitting them closer, a family carved from loss and labor. One evening, as the cottonwoods glowed gold under the setting sun, Clara called Nokoni to the porch. She stood in a dress mended with care, her hair loose, catching the light. "I kept waiting for you to ride off," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Every day, I thought you'd take your horse and go. Why didn't you?" Nokoni leaned against a post, Elias's hat heavy on his head. "'Cause this is where the trail led, not just for Elias, but for me, for you." He paused, his dark eyes steady. "I ain't him, Clara. I chose this." Her breath caught, and for a moment, the plain's vast silence held them. She stepped closer, her hand finding his, her touch warm against his calluses. "Then stay," she whispered. "Not for promises. For us." He nodded, his voice low in Comanche, a prayer of thanks to the land that had brought him here. "I ain't replacing him," he said. "I'm just Nokoni." Spring deepened, the fields green and proud. Zeke took to riding with Nokoni, learning to track deer, his laughter freer. May's garden sprouted, her small hands pulling weeds with a grin. Clara stood beside Nokoni at dawn, watching the sunrise paint the plains in fire. The ranch was no longer a ghost. It was theirs, built on sweat and trust. One night, under a sky thick with stars, Nokoni carved a wooden horse for May, its lines smooth as the stories he told. Clara watched, her eyes bright, and slipped her hand into his. The land stretched wide, its scars fading under new growth. Nokoni looked out, the weight of his past, his people's loss, his sister's silence, eased by the family he'd found. The letters that brought him here were gone, burned in the barn's fire. But their promise lived in the laughter from the porch, the steady beat of Zeke's hammer, and Clara's hand in his. Spring had come, and with it, a life reborn from ash. The Wyoming plains fall silent, but Nokoni's journey, from a blood-stained letter to a family reborn, echoes still. What did this tale of loyalty and redemption stir in you? Did Clara's strength, Zeke's struggle, or Nokoni's resolve hit closest to home? Drop your thoughts below. I'm eager to hear where this story took you. My gratitude goes to each of you for riding this trail with me, sharing in the dust and dreams of Willow Creek. Until our paths cross again under the wide western sky, keep the fire of these stories burning. See you at the next campfire, where more tales await.